Welcome to Govs TV and 91.9 Public Affairs. I'm Micah Terrell. When you say the name Michelangelo, there's instant name recognition of this famous artist, and an Austin Peay art professor is finding new and interesting information about him. Dr. Tamara Smithers. Tammy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So first, tell us all about Michelangelo. How did you get interested in this artist?
Well, this is an artist who I remember being in high school, even middle school in art classes. We would get taught some art history, and I had a wonderful high school teacher who would sit us and tell us stories, so personalizing these artists. And I just remember the stories about Michelangelo, just really identifying with this larger than life personality and wanting to learn more, so as like a 15-year-old. And so here I am so many years later, kind of fascinated in the same thing, so it's just been a lifelong interest.
Wow. So what were some of the cool and new things that you found out about him? You said there are a lot of really nice, neat stories about this famous old master that we probably don't know. Tell me one of them.
Yeah. So basically, I think Michelangelo is probably one of the most artists from this old master period that we would say that has the most information written about him. We have 3 biographies during his lifetime, all his letters, letters written to him. So from that, we can pull a lot of stories that kind of give us the behind the scenes Michelangelo, and that's kind of what I'm most fascinated with. Like for instance, after he painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling, he came back to paint the Last Judgment. And his work was being criticized for all the nudity, for it being in a church. This was in the kind of post-Protestant Reformation era, so there was a lot of attention to that. And so one of the cardinals went to the Pope, who commissioned the painting, and said, there's too much nudity. This is, it's more suitable for a bathhouse or a brothel. Oh. And so Michelangelo was kind of passive aggressive. He kind of quietly just went back and did some paintings. And in the scene of hell, he put the face of that complainer, that critic, in hell. And so then that cardinal ran to the Pope and said, look what he did. He put my face as Midas in hell. And the Pope said, well, if it were purgatory, I could intercede, but because it's hell, I have no jurisdiction. Oh. And so it's just these little stories that give this kind of, he was passive aggressive. He wasn't openly violent or angry, but he was really kind of cunning and smart about getting retribution with that particular critic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I find those really fun.
Those are really cool. Now, how did you, because there is so much new and everything, what did you sort of, I guess, kind of help get your part of that new book? How did you work to get that in there and get new information out of it?
Yeah, the volume that I published last year is a compilation of essays, but the theme and focus of it is responding to all the thousands and thousands of pieces of literature published in the century prior, and then how can we move forward in this millennium with new information. So it's both responding to a lot of the big wigs that were in the 20th century. What this essay is doing is kind of looking at new perspectives, whether they're wider angles, looking at different contexts, or more narrow. So kind of working within that to find new perspectives. So that's one of the main points of the volume.
Great. Now, how, as a professor and an instructor, how do you take what you learn and use that to help your students relate to Michelangelo now?
I think what I'm trying to do is instill in them that passion and interest and that kind of desire to just be hungry to learn more. And I'm teaching a class on Italian Renaissance art right now, so I get to indulge and tell all these stories. And they just make people laugh. They personalize Michelangelo. And it's really fascinating. I did get to teach a class here my first year on Michelangelo, and it was while I was working on the volume. And I was myself trying to pinpoint, why is Michelangelo so fascinating today? What makes him so intriguing? And it's hard to pinpoint. And I asked them, and I couldn't get a pinpoint, and I loved this one answer. They wrote it down. Just because he's Michelangelo. The question is answered in the similar terms of that it's just unanswerable. So, and that's kind of, his work and his personality, they are larger than life in and of themselves, so it kind of reflects that.
Yeah. Now tell us about the name, because I know I asked you before we started recording about, because I've heard it Michelangelo, I've heard it Michelangelo. Tell us more about the name, because it is such a recognizable name.
Yeah, I've been to a whole conference or a symposium on Michelangelo, and you're going to hear it interchanged. Even the same person in the same sentence will flip it. And so it could be by preference. I say Michelangelo when I'm speaking Italian because that's anglicized. But in Italian, it would be Michelangelo. But actually, he would have said Michelangelo because that would have been the Tuscan pronunciation at the time. So when you go to Florence today and you ask for a Coca-Cola, you need to say Coca-Cola.
Oh,
Because they pronounce the C's slightly different
Cool.
than the modern Italian, regular Italian today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now you had the little story about the Sistine Chapel. That's probably like the most recognized, probably artwork by him. But what other works of art have you learned about through your studies of him that are really cool too?
Well, some of my works are some of his pietas. It's a theme that he picks up from his very first uncommissioned work when he was 15 years old and living in the Medici, to the last sculptures that he also did uncommissioned for his own grave memorial. And so this idea of the Madonna after she comes down off the cross, like the famous Pietà in St. Peter's, but he really works on that theme throughout his entire life. And he lived to be 2 weeks. He died 2 weeks before his 89th birthday. So if you want to think about at the time, that's 2 lifetimes. So I think some of his later works are my favorites. So.
Why do you think that you like them so much?
That's where I'm working on another. I just gave a conference paper and I'm working on another publication. That's where I see his style just really kind of moving in a completely different way from his earlier works. You know, his earlier works were very classicizing. He also kind of brought in mannerism where things are very artificial and contrived. And you know, this last Pietà in particular, it looks like a modern artwork. It's very elongated, it's ethereal, it's floating. It's like nothing he had done before, and he's doing it, you know, in the face of death. You know, he thought he was going to die actually for half his lifetime. He wrote about death constantly. He was obsessed about it. He was ill sometimes. But you know, at that point, you know, he worked on this sculpture 6 days, carving, before he actually passed away. So that's that personalizing thing gives it extra meaning.
Yeah,
I feel
it
like.
does. Yeah, because I think a lot of people do, and I know what little bit I studied in art and everything, it's just I think you kind of put them up on a pedestal and you kind of think like they're not quite human or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was good. I guess you got to kind of find out more about him as the man, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what my essay in the volume, Michelangelo and the New Millennium, focuses on, that humanizing aspect. Like behind the scenes, how does he work with patrons? How does he work with other artists? You know, what kind of friend was he? And so I call it an anecdotal portrait. So I'm using a variety of disparate primary sources to kind of bring together this humanized Michelangelo. Yeah.
And what was the journey like finding all these stories? Was it mostly like research in a library, or was it, you know, talking to people who may have had family who knew him, or how was that journey?
No, it would be through research with primary sources. So I actually received an Austin P research grant a couple years ago. I had been in Rome, and I spent a week at the Bibliothèque Berenson at Villa Itati and worked specifically because they had a great collection of the primary sources, so I could just pull everything off the shelf, and I'm kind of looking for a certain theme. So it was reading a lot of material and then literally just pulling out little bits to bring it all together.
And so now you're working on this next piece. So what sort of led up to that?
Well, the book project that I have now is a continuation of my dissertation. And so this book project was just a side project. And so now I'm wanting to return back to my larger project. And so I'm looking at the cult of not just Michelangelo, but Raphael. So this idea of I don't want to say being put up on the pedestal, but you use that word, but you know, in their own lifetime, they're being called divine. Michelangelo's nickname is Il Divino. When he died, all of the art academicians came to his coffin, and when they opened it, they all reached out and touched his face. So there's these really kind of moments where he's being treated like an artistic saint. And same with Raphael. The Art Academy in Rome had a skull that they believed to be Raphael's in their art offices. And every year on the anniversary of St. Luke, who is the patron saint of painters, they would take their brushes and touch that skull as if it would imbue some kind of artistic superpower. But that kind of memorialization and commemoration, that physicality of it, and is kind of really fascinating to me.
And now to switch gears a little bit, Rome is such a place for an artist like you to study and learn so much. And the study abroad program that you're working on, tell us more about that, because that's in Rome too, right?
Yes, yep. So, when I was an undergrad, my life-changing experience, and anybody who has done a study abroad will kind of say the same thing. I got to spend it in Rome, and every day I would come home and be like, oh, I can't believe I saw that. And so, as an instructor and a teacher, I want to be able to provide that. So we're doing a program called Art in Rome. It's going to be 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks in Rome, Italy. So we'll get to have, class in the Sistine Chapel, in the Colosseum, doing day trips to Florence so we can see some of the great works there, and then a day trip to Pompeii. So I'm really excited. It's not just for art history majors, so we would have art appreciation credit. And so it's open to any student in Austin P who would like to come with us.
Wonderful. Now, if people are interested, Tammy, what can they do? How can they, is there an interest meeting or something that they should attend?
We actually are having an interest meeting. It would be November 15th. It's next Tuesday at 11:30 in the painting studio. And we will have more after the new year when the new semester starts. But anybody who's interested can email me at smitherst@apsu.edu. And I would love to talk to them about it.
That would be great. Yeah, because Rome is such an interesting place in itself. Already even the culture. That's just going to be amazing to have like class in the Sistine Chapel. What do you hope that the students will take home from that?
I think one of the things that students don't realize when they're studying images on a screen is everything else that's going to come with that in person, firsthand. The scale is going to be so much larger than they ever imagined. The sounds are going to be, giving them this different context, even the smells. So just having that firsthand experience of getting to see artwork in its original context is just amazingly rewarding to art students and anyone interested in art and culture alike.
That's awesome too, and I was going to say that's great that somebody who may not necessarily be an art major can still go and appreciate.
Yeah, and Rome has everything for everybody, and just think about the culinary delights of Rome with the pizza and pasta and gelato and the open-aired markets and the fountains and just the history. It's a 2,500-year-old city just built in these amazing layers. So you walk down the street and you can see ancient Roman foundations, a medieval church, right next to a Baroque church. So just all through the ages. It's
really
amazing.
Cool. Yeah. Now, there's also some need for internships, or interns rather, in the art department too. Could you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, we actually have a really strong art and design internship program. So we place students in real-world art situations like the Frist or a graphic design firm. We've actually had a student intern for a fashion photographer in New York. So it's really open to the student and how far they kind of want to dream with their internship. And it's 4 course credit. We have a lot of great companies in the area that we work with, from FrameMaker, Framing Art, Florum, learning production and ceramics. So we usually have a really strong constituency every semester of these students getting out there. And so getting that kind of real world out of the classroom experience, I think, is important today in this ever changing global world where getting that outside experience is essential.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about getting your foot in the door in any job is really tough. So this probably can help them maybe get their foot in the door in the challenging art world too.
Yeah, the connections that I hear of students making, especially for artists. A lot of them have had their own solo exhibitions in Nashville or in Clarksville just through connections, and a lot of them have been hired and gotten jobs. But also just getting to try something on. It's not as scary as starting a new job and you're not sure what you want to do yet. You can just try things and try it out, and that's what's kind of fun about the internship.
Yeah. Now, is the internship like a full semester, or is
It's 100 hours, 3 credits, and so we oversee it during the course of a semester.
Cool. That's great. So if people are interested in that, they do need to be obviously probably an art student for that.
We have art minors and various
minors,
various of our minors that can do it as well.
Cool.
So it counts as an upper level class. It's for someone into junior, senior level who's kind of ready to work independently and responsibly in the community.
Great. So like junior, senior level.
It's a
Great.
4,000 level class.
Cool. Good. Now, if people are interested in that, should they email you also? Or
Yes, and we promote it within the department for our majors.
Yeah. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So and I wanted to ask you, because I know a lot of people are like, art, how would I use that, in real life? But that there's a lot more involved, I think, than just drawing or painting, right?
Well, certainly, I mean, you're learning creativity and critical analytical thinking skills, and to be, you know, a human functioning in this fast-paced society, you know, those skills are essential in learning to write and communicate your ideas, work well with people, follow through on a project. You know, those are all things that can be so applied to the real world after graduation.
And I am out of questions, but
Okay.
what did you want to add that I may have not asked you about?
Nothing. Yeah, I just hope students kind of find their own passion and interest within the world, and you know, art and art history has been mine, and so I just encourage students to find whatever it is that fuels their fire.
Yeah, because like you said, you started out at 15, and here you are.
Yeah.
You just kind of carried it along. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Dr. Smithers, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. And I'm Micah Terrell with Govs TV and 91.9 Public Affairs.